Hello and welcome everybody to this edition of the Raja and Neil FASD Book Club on prevention, recognition, and management of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And today we're joined by Dr. Carolyn Blackburn, who is going to be talking to us about identifying a child with FASD in educational settings. And we're really in for a treat because Carolyn has been working on FASD and education issues for quite a long time, including in a lot of work that was done earlier with then NoFast UK, now National FASD, and she is one of our expert committee members as well. I'm not going to speak a whole lot right now, but Carolyn, I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you could introduce yourself a little bit more as you get started and start sharing your slides when you're ready. Thanks.
Great, thanks Sandy, and thanks everyone for coming to listen. I'm Carolyn Blackburn, as already said, and I work at Birmingham City University, where I'm a researcher in education. Most of my research is done with families and children, and this presentation will draw on one project in particular. I've worked on 3 projects about FASD. One was an early years project funded by Worcestershire County Council, looking at what early years practitioners need to know about prenatal exposure to alcohol. This was then followed up by the Teaching Agency for Schools, looking at education for children with FASD, children already diagnosed. And then I was also involved in the Complex Learning Difficulties and Disabilities project, which also included FASD. This presentation will mostly draw on the schools-based project, which was in collaboration with NoFast, which is now National FASD. Okay, so you might think, well, you know, what is the basis for identifying children with FASD in education, and why would you want to do it? I think it's important to say, first of all, this is not about asking educators to diagnose children. You know, it's not appropriate that they do so. They're not qualified or skilled to do that. And I'm sure that people like Raja Mukherjee would say, well, that's just, you know, not what we need teachers to do. But both international policy in human rights and national policy in human rights and equity laws encourage teachers to monitor, assess and observe children's development and progress so that children can fulfill their potential, basically. And the SEN Code of Practice requires schools to appoint a special educational needs coordinator who takes special responsibility for this in collaboration with class teachers. And the Children and Families Act makes sure that teachers and educators work with parents and that children have a voice in their own education so that their rights and voice and perspectives are valued and respected. Other reasons why you might identify children with FASD in education is to make sure that you provide the right support for their needs and to make sure that it's sensitive to both any diagnosis that they've got, but also to their individual needs. To protect future pregnancies and encourage healthy pregnancies and families, because we know that one pregnancy in a family that's prenatally exposed might suggest that there would be future pregnancies. So, you know, you can recognise that that family needs extra support, both for that child, but for any future children. We need to raise awareness of FASD and prenatal exposure to alcohol as a society. And we need to strengthen the argument for improved services to argue that this is not the same as autism or ADHD and that we need something very specific. But I'm sure that you can also think of other reasons why we might need to identify children with FASD in education, and I'll just leave that as something for you to ponder over. So what are we looking for? Well, the Special Educational Needs Code of Practice that educators must work to outlines 4 specific areas of special educational needs for children to receive support, and they are communication and interaction. That's about speech and language and other forms of communication, cognition and learning, and that's about thinking and planning, social, emotional and mental health, and sensory and or physical needs. I think it's fair to say that children with FASD could have needs in all four of these areas, they overlap. They're not really discrete in this way. And that, you know, you would be looking for children to have extra needs and need support in all four of them. So what are we looking for if we're kind of trying to look for a child that we think might need support in this category? Well, we first of all have to look for their strengths. I think it's really important that we work to children's strengths. And there have been, children with FASD have been noted to be often quite outgoing, fun-loving, caring and affectionate, almost to an extreme, so that they're, you know, particularly fond of other children. They can be sensitive, loyal, kind and trusting in relationships, but this can also be a problem because it can be too trusting of people that they don't know and that are not necessarily going to be very kind to them or helpful to them. They can succeed in very structured situations, things like, you know, knowing what's happening now, what's happening next, can be really good. They often enjoy repetitive work, things that are predictable, things that they can know what it is they've got to do. They can have very strong practical skills and tend to be good at drama, art, woodwork, things like that. Have a very strong sense of fairness, so they can advocate on behalf of other children, and most of the time that's appropriate, but sometimes it's not. Strong visual memories and good verbal fluency. They've been described as being very verbose, which often masks poor receptive language, poor social understanding. However, there are things that they need support with. So if we start with preschoolers, there's a whole list of things here that I'm not going to read out, but I'm just going to make a kind of verbal note that these are the kinds of things that you expect to see in preschoolers: feeding and sleeping problems, you know, hyperactivity, inability to understand danger, things like this, low frustration and hyperactivity. We expect and we want to see very active children in preschools, but it's when you notice, you know, a large cluster of these symptoms and they're prolonged and pronounced way beyond you would expect them to be. So you might notice children want to play more for long periods in the kind of toilet sinks rather than come and play with actual things, build things with Lego, for example, or make jigsaws or play with their friends. They might be in areas where you hadn't planned for them to be and on their own if you kind of not watching them all the time. So it's that kind of thing. And then when you get into the school age children, it's things like this developmental delays carry on. And the gap between this child and their peers starts to widen. Things like, you know, I've known 13-year-olds, for example, still struggling with hygiene routines, such as toileting or not understanding the need for proper cleaning and deodorant and things like that. And then quite kind of complicated medical difficulties, such that nobody in a complex health care situation can connect all the dots and understand all of the different parts of that child and all of the different aspects of their medical and health care that might be needed. And you get contradiction between different professionals, which is really challenging for parents and puts them in a difficult position when they're sitting in a conflict position between different professionals. And then there are the learning difficulties, and I'm drawing here on partly on established literature and partly on things that the teachers and parents said to me in the school-based project. So not understanding the link between what they do and any side effects of that, not understanding that this thing that they did caused this person to do that, or for them to be reprimanded in the way that they are. So things like reward charts and things like that might not work. Speech, language and communication delays and disorders, including verbosity, you know, the ability to say a lot that not necessarily makes sense, masking poor understanding. Cognitive difficulties, including poor short-term memory and concentration, difficulty in understanding mathematical concepts such as time and understanding money. You know, a lot of people say that children with FASD don't enjoy maths, and I would contradict that slightly. I think it depends how you deliver it. I have worked with children who have very much enjoyed measuring things and you know, kind of writing down the measurements, and if things are targeted at that child, if you play to their interest and what they like doing, you might find that they actually enjoy maths quite a lot. They might not enjoy, though, trying to add complex numbers that are quite abstract and don't mean anything to them. Impaired executive functioning, and this really goes back to, by the time a child gets to secondary school, being able to get to 6 different lessons a day with all of the right equipment in place, and you know all the things that they're supposed to do to get from one place to another. And this obviously has an impact on independence and a range of social situations, daily living skills, for example. Behavioural difficulties have been described by quite a lot of people, but it's also been described by occupational therapists, these behavioural difficulties, as sensory seeking behaviours. So the inability to sit still and be quite hyperactive is quite often related to, you know, overwhelming sensory processing disorders, and we'll touch a little bit on that a couple of slides down. So involving an occupational therapist is a good idea to get a proper assessment. Social difficulties, you know, acquiring the, you know, appropriate social and emotional skills. Obviously that impacts on relationships and friendships, and any activity where you need to understand the state of mind of other people and predicting how that might affect their actions, such as board games, for example, things like that, or any kind of games where there are rules. Understanding a person's behaviour and on how it might predict what they might do is really important for that kind of situation. And understanding boundaries, and when you know that you don't understand the social situation and you're frustrated by your own behaviour, but you can't stop it, that can be really, really frustrating and lead to low self-esteem. Emotional difficulties, the need to rely on external prompts from adults can result in further low self-esteem. And later on, children begin to identify the difference between themselves and their peers. And then there are the secondary disabilities, such as poor mental health problems, disrupted schooling, trouble with the law. Inappropriate sexual behaviour has been mentioned by a few people. These are the sensory processing problems that I mentioned, you know, regulation of your own response to sensations. We all have 8 senses, and they're listed here in this slide. You know, there are activities that can help with this, such as those swings that you see in special schools. I'm not seeing many in mainstream schools, but they help a child know where, you know, where they are in time and space, and they can be really effective as a kind of breakout activity. And so there's a few activities that you can do there. Things like sweeping and kind of heavy motion work are known to help with things like this. And then, you know, we know that this can lead to mental health problems. Premature birth has quite a high interaction with prenatal exposure to alcohol, especially extreme amounts of alcohol. And this was found by Elizabeth Elliott, who works with Aboriginal populations in the outback in Australia. And then attachment difficulties compounding the relationship challenges. I'm just going to finish with this one slide that gives some classroom management support ideas. And I'm fairly certain that this slide, or the ideas that go into it, can be found in the resources that are on the National FASD website relating to this project. If not, then I'm happy for people to have these slides so that they can kind of try any of these ideas themselves.
That's super, Carolyn. Thank you so much for, we know it's a big ask for people to try to cover a whole chapter, and in your case, you know, decades of experience in 15 minutes, but we're really just trying to give people little bite-sized tips.